Is there really more corruption in politics today? Or do we simply see more of it because more flashlights are pointed at power? Leaks, parliamentary inquiries, lobbying registers, NGOs, chat logs, metadata. In the past, maybe a paper file folder disappeared. Today, it's a text message that vanishes. That feels more modern, but for oversight, it isn't necessarily an improvement. And that is exactly where this topic begins. Not with the lazy slogan that they're all corrupt, but with the more precise question, which rules make abuse of power easy and which rules make it costly? Because precision matters here. Criminal corruption is not just everything that looks sleazy. Bribery means an advantage in exchange for a specific favor. Then there is cronyism, jobs, contracts, or opportunities handed to your own people. There are conflicts of interest, when public office collides with private benefit. There is legal lobbying, which in democracies is fundamentally allowed as long as it remains transparent and open to scrutiny. And then there is the revolving door effect. Ministry today, corporate consulting tomorrow, supervisory board the day after. Not all of that is illegal, but much of it can eat away at trust like rust in a bridge, invisible at first and then suddenly structural. The mask procurement deals became a textbook case. Politically, they felt like a shock. Legally, they mainly showed how narrowly earlier rules had been written. Questionable commission business by elected representatives could, for a long time, be difficult to fit under the criminal definition of bribery of lawmakers. That does not mean everything was morally acceptable. It means the law only reached into a very narrow corridor. And that is often where political corruption lives most comfortably. Not in the crude image of a suitcase full of cash, but in legal gray zones with business cards, consulting contracts, and the familiar defense. At the time, the rules were not clearly defined. A similarly delicate issue is digital record keeping. If important text messages or chats connected to public procurement cannot be found, were deleted, or were never properly archived, that is not automatically corruption in the criminal law sense. But it weakens oversight, traceability, and ultimately the rule of law itself. The dispute over messages that were not released or were deleted in connection with EU vaccine procurement shows this problem clearly. Even if no criminal corruption can ultimately be proven, the institutional question remains brutally important. Anyone exercising power cannot communicate as if government were just an ephemeral group chat. Then there are affairs that are less corruption cases than trust cases. Plagiarism in doctoral theses, for example. A fraudulently obtained title is not automatically bribery, but it damages credibility. If someone cheats when presenting their own academic achievement, the public is left with an uncomfortable thought. If even the footnotes were manipulated, how reliable is the rest? That is not a legal equation. It is a political one. Scandals involving grants and subsidies in the worlds of administration, politics, and business show another recurring pattern, including in cases discussed around Sachsenring or QMF. Often, the problem is not a single villain. It is a network of personal closeness, time pressure, regional prestige, and weak oversight. Everyone wants to save jobs. No one wants to be the spoilsport. And suddenly, money starts flowing into murky channels. Corruption often wears the suit of a good cause. As a historical extreme, it is worth looking at Italy's P2 Lodge, a secret network with links into politics, business, media, and the security apparatus, almost like a state within the state. That is not a normal picture of today's German-speaking democracies. But it is a reminder that corruption is rarely only about money. It is also about access, loyalty, silence, careers, and the question of who calls whom when officially there should be no reason for the call at all. So where does the German-speaking world stand? In the 2025 Corruption Perceptions Index, Germany scores 77 out of 100 and ranks 10th, Switzerland scores 80 and ranks 6th, and Austria scores 69 and ranks 21st. That sounds good. And in international comparison, it is. But the CPI measures perceptions of public corruption. It does not capture everything that remains hidden, and certainly not everything that has been legalized, professionalized, or elegantly outsourced. So, the provocative but fair question is this. Do good scores reflect clean politics, or can they sometimes also reflect better institutions, better concealment, and a higher level of professionalization? At the bottom of the CPI are countries such as South Sudan, Somalia, and Venezuela. There, war, poverty, a weak judiciary, limited press freedom, and a lack of oversight massively encourage corruption. That shows something important. Corruption is not just a character flaw in individual people. It is a systems problem. Where oversight is missing, proximity to power becomes a currency. And that leads to another question. Why do politicians seem less likely to resign today? Perhaps because shame has become a weaker political category. Perhaps because in tight parliamentary majorities, parties think more in terms of power arithmetic. And perhaps because attractive positions await after office. Advisory roles, supervisory boards, international posts, networks in EU policy, or the security sphere. That can be a legitimate use of experience, but it can also look like a reward. That very ambiguity is dangerous. The core issue, then, is not whether human beings are fallible. Of course they are. The real issue is whether a political system rewards misconduct or punishes it. If the cost of questionable behavior is low, gray zones become invitations. If transparency is weak, influence moves into back channels. If documentation is optional, accountability becomes theater. And if laws are written too narrowly, public outrage may be huge while legal consequences remain minimal. This is why moral outrage alone is not enough. It may be emotionally satisfying, but it does not redesign incentives. What matters more is institutional architecture. Stronger rules against bribery of elected officials, cooling off periods before former office holders can move into sectors they previously regulated, transparent lobbying registers, disclosure of outside income, strong freedom of information laws, mandatory documentation that also covers texts and chat messages, protection for whistleblowers, stricter rules on party donations, independent public prosecutors. In short, less sermonizing, more system design. Because corruption in modern democracies often does not arrive with comic book villains and obvious envelopes of cash. It arrives dressed as consultation, urgency, expertise, networking, or economic necessity. It appears in exceptions, informal channels, private phones, personal familiarity, and the sentence, everyone meant well. That is exactly why clean boundaries matter so much. Not because every contact between politics and business is dirty, and not because every scandal proves a criminal offense, but because democracy depends on the public being able to distinguish legitimate influence from hidden advantage. So, is there more corruption today? The honest answer is, we cannot say that simply. What we can say is that today we often see more fragments of how power actually works. And those fragments reveal something uncomfortable. The danger is often not outright law-breaking in broad daylight. It is the accumulation of gray zones, weak rules, and informal privileges that are hard to prosecute, but easy to normalize. And once normalization sets in, trust erodes. Slowly at first, then all at once. If you enjoy sharp but precise analysis like this, subscribe to Aurora Knowledge, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments which topic we should explore next.